got a bad scan? Don't throw it away. During this Blender tutorial, I will be taking this photogrammetry model, which is full of holes, and turning it into this perfectly respectable model. So I'm going to make a start by importing my photogrammetry model by going to File, Import, down to, here it is, OBJ, Wavefront OBJ, and I need to go to wherever I've saved my photogrammetry project, Meshroom cache, and then texturing, and then this folder here, and textured mesh.obj. Import Wavefront OBJ. Here we are. As you can see, it's kind of upside down and tilted, but we can soon rectify that. Very quick way of getting started with this is I normally select the model and then go to Object, Set Origin to Geometry, so that when I do rotate it, it will rotate around the central point in the geometry, which is here. Make sure that you've set your rotation pivot to median point. So now when I rotate, it's going to rotate around that like thus. Okay, I'm going to hit 3 on my keyboard, or 1, depends on how it looks in your viewport, and I'm going to hit R and then just rotate until it looks about right. So we can see the shape there. Maybe rotate it a little more this way, and then 7 on the keyboard to look at the overhead view, and rotate again until that squares up nicely. Maybe a little more this way. Yeah, I think that will do. That looks pretty good. And as you can see, this model is quite impressive. So if I go over to the material view, give it a couple of seconds, there we are. There's my model. And I feel quite pleased with that. That's good. I'll just save this before we go any further. There's a lot in this model which needs to be removed. So the surround, as you can see, there's a lot there. I probably want to just cut it so that it's close to the tree stump as possible. And I'm going to do that by hitting 7 on the numerical pad and then making sure I've got my object selected. Hit Tab to go into edit mode. Put on toggle X-ray and then hit C and then increase the radius of this selector with your mouse wheel and then just click. Making sure, of course, that you've got face select on, and then right click to come out of that. And then inverse your selection, Control I. So everything else other than the selected area or previously selected area becomes selected, and then hit X and delete faces. Good, there we go. Tabbing back out of edit mode. I think we can work with that. That looks good. I'll just save it. Now, as you may have noticed, up here, we have several holes in our mesh. So it's not a perfect scan. There are holes, there are deformations, and if you actually look inside some of these holes, there's actually geometry, false geometry inside the holes. And there are bits that are just hanging around which aren't connected to anything. So it's not a perfect scan. There are lots of good areas, but a couple of bad. And I wouldn't want to throw this scan away. I think that there's plenty more that we could do with this. So in this tutorial, we are going to look at repairing these various holes, removing erroneous bits around the edges, and preparing it for optimization. Now, I could work directly on this very high resolution scan. As you can see, the geometry, it's absolutely crazy. If I just bring down the stats here, you can see that we're dealing with, well, basically nearly 1.3 million faces. That is a lot of geometry. By the time I finish with this, I'm hoping to have something like, I don't know, 10 or 20,000, not 1.3 million. So what I will do is I'm going to actually work on the optimized version of this mesh. I'm going to keep this mesh, and I'm going to do as I did in many of my other tutorials. I'm going to create a mesh with a lower resolution, and for that I'm going to use a program called Instant Meshes. I'm then going to import the low resolution mesh and bake all of the detail from the high resolution mesh onto the low resolution mesh, but it's the low resolution mesh that I'm going to repair. After all, working with a high resolution mesh can be a bit of a strain on your computer's resources. So without further ado, I'm going to export this mesh here. File, export, and I'll export it again as a wavefront OBJ. I will put it there, that's good. Export. Over in Instant Meshes, I'll click on Open, choose Object OBJ, go to where my seat file is, my wooden carved seat.obj, open that, and there it is. It's loaded up nicely. Preparation is key with this sort of thing. We want to make sure that our mesh is as optimized as possible and clean as possible. So first of all, I'm going to reduce the target vertex count. I like to bring it round to a model like this, around about 10K will do perfectly. Making sure that our mesh runs from top to bottom, left to right, I think is quite important. So I'm going to use the comb here, and I'm going to paint a line very, very carefully, like that. And that will cause, and you'll see a representation of that there, you can see a lot of vertical lines now coming through. If I do this on the horizontal, you'll see that they kind of straighten out as well. That's looking a little better. Perhaps I will do something similar here as well. I'll just comb a line there. Also, I'll have one going across there as well. See if I can straighten these out. Now if I switch the comb off for a second just so I can rotate, I'll have a look at the rest of the model, see how that looks. I think that is okay. Can you see the way the lines are going vertically and horizontally, if you like, top to bottom, left to right? So I'm trying to get that to look uniform. I think that will do. Now if I just click on Solve, so I get to see the mesh there as well. That's fairly tidy. Okay, export mesh. I always click on pure quad mesh. I like to put this on 1, extract mesh, and there is our finished article. Now there's a lot of detail gone from this, but don't worry, we're going to bake that detail back in via normal maps. Now I'm going to click on Save. I'll save it over the model that I exported. And now in Blender, if I go to File, Import, Wavefront OBJ, and then look for my model that I've just exported from Instant Meshes, there it is. Okay, so that's sitting exactly where my high resolution mesh. So if we look over here, if I just switch off the original textured mesh that came through from Meshroom, you can see there is my low resolution model. And if I go the other way around, switch off the one that I've just imported, there's my high resolution model. They both sit in the same space, which is great. I'm going to call this one high res, and this one low res, just so we know where we are. So with the high res, I think I'll switch that off, and the low res, let's just quickly inspect it. Everything's okay. If you see lots of blue lines everywhere, if you just click on the edge select up here, select everything, right click, and just make sure that you remove sharp. So if you just clear sharp, it will get rid of any blue lines. This used to be the case in older versions of Blender with the way that it used to import OBJs. Doesn't tend to be a problem now, but if it's there, right click, remove sharp. I'm going to come out of Edit and Shade Smooth. Now, okay, not much detail in there. It's not looking great, but we will bake that detail back in as we have done in previous tutorials. But anyway, the big problem with this model, of course, can be seen up here with all of these large holes. So this is where I'm going to start my editing. I'm going to remove all of the bad information, the information that you can see inside the mesh. I'm going to clean up the edges, and I'm going to fill those holes. Tapping into edit mode. This is going to be a little messy, so I think what I might do, I'll make sure I'm on face select mode first. I'll go into X-ray. I'll just click away just so everything's deselected. And this is where all the problem is, up here. So if I hit C on my keyboard and just select all of these faces in X-ray mode, remember, it has to be in X-ray mode. You can see I've selected that entire area there. So we should have covered, if I come out of X-ray mode, we should have covered all of the bad areas, but we've also included a lot of good area as well. But now that I've done it that way, because there's a lot going on in the inside, which we can't easily get to, I'm going to hit C, and then I'm just going to right click on the mouse wheel and select the external bits that you can see. Being very careful when I go around all of these little holes, not leaving any important faces out. Now, I could have done this with the high resolution model, but I think I would have been here all day doing that. So I'm glad that I've done it this way around. Okay, now I've done that, I'm just going to double check to make sure I haven't selected anything that I don't want to remove. As you can see, I've selected loads of internal bits, and maybe this is a good opportunity just to check elsewhere. See, there's a few faces there which need selecting. I'll just go over to X-ray mode. Select those very carefully. That might do for now. I can't see anything else which needs selecting. Coming out of X-ray mode. All I'll need to do now is, of course, hit X and then faces. So now we're ready to start repairing our mesh, but I'm not going to do a huge amount. I'm not going to sort of level things out as such. It will just be a question of filling all of the gaps for now. We will later remodel certain areas using sculpting tools. I've noticed a few bits I don't like the looks of. This bit here, maybe I could deselect that. Maybe just select a couple of these here. Yeah, it's worth just going over, just having a look to see if there's any bits that you'd like to remove from the mesh. There we are. That's something to work with. Now, the main method I use for filling holes like this, it's quite a simple one. There are many ways of doing this, but this is the method I like to use because of its simplicity. I will look for an area like this, for instance, just with the edge select around the edge, and then just press F, and it will fill that gap. I know I've left these ones out because I didn't really like the looks of those two faces, so I'll select those also, delete, and then again select. I could just select these and then just press F. Now, as you've noticed, there's not much geometry going on in here. So what I will do is, using the knife tool, that's K on the keyboard, I'll just link these two here. And again here, now I'm just going to have to work this one out. I think maybe I will cut from here down to perhaps over here. And then where am I going to take this one? Maybe something like that. It's not ideal, it's not clean geometry, but you can see that it's not clean because, of course, it's a bit messy here to begin with anyway, so I've just tidied that up a little. I think that's okay, that will do. And then I just follow that same procedure throughout the mesh. Don't worry too much about the way the mesh looks. Once we've worked on this with the sculpting tool, we've smoothed things down, it'll just naturally form into a tidier mesh. I'm aiming for triangles and squares. Squares are better, but if it requires a triangle, then that's fine. So 3 points or 4 points for each face. quite sure what's going on there. I'll get rid of that and just tidy it up there. Good, I think that is all of the holes filled. Let's come out of edit mode and have a look to see what we've got. Yes, there are some holes, some of it looks terrible, but we're just going to go with that. Again, we're going to re-sculpt this afterward. Once we've applied all of the textures, there are going to be holes in the textures which we're then going to clone out using texture paint. But for the time being, that is now a model without any holes in it. So that's looking pretty good. Now, before we can bake the high resolution onto the low resolution, we need to first of all unwrap this current low resolution model. So if I tab over into edit, making sure that I've got edge select on, and I'm going to add seams to help the unwrapping process. So usually you look for corners and around edges to put your seams. A quick way of creating a seam is to click at one end of your mesh, and you want a line going down to say here. Hold down the control key and click where you want your line to finish, and it will create a straight line from those 2 points, or straight-ish at least. And I'll do the same here as well. It can get a bit jagged at times depending on the complexity of your mesh and how clean the geometry is. So now I'll select all the way around the bottom of the tree stump. So it really is just a question of splitting up your mesh into regions. I think that looks well divided. I don't know if there's any other areas I could chop into, but I think that I've broken this down into a few nice pieces. Maybe because there's a bit of a step here where there's additional geometry, I might just split this one as well. It hasn't quite gone according to plan. Let's try that again. Give it a bit of guidance. That's better. Now, right click and mark as seams. So now you can see quite clearly the orange marks for the seams. If I go over to face select mode and select all, just press A on your keypad. I just expand this out a little, UV editor, and then coming over here, Unwrap, we'll find, there we go, there are all the pieces. I usually like to just change the settings here for the margin to 0.01 or 0.01, just to push them out a little further, more of a gap. Now you can at this point rearrange things a little. This doesn't always come out to the most optimized degree, so sometimes it's worth choosing this mode up here, which selects the islands, in other words, the isolated bits, and then you can start shifting them around. At this point also, it's worth having a look at your mesh just to see whether it's healthy. You don't want any mesh crossing over itself like this. If you see this, then there's something not right. Perhaps one of your seams is not quite completed. It has a gap in it somewhere. So it's worth just checking the quality of this. See here, we've got these little bits here. Now, I'm not quite sure where they are. It could be just a few rogue faces inside, perhaps. I don't know. There is one way of actually finding out what it is, and that's you just select a number of regions, Control L, and it will select those regions, and you can just go for a process of elimination. Control L, it's none of those. It's going to be none of these because these are all huge regions, whereas that was just a couple of squares. Okay, so, there it is. See, what I could have done is now I've selected all the regions. If I'd done a Control I to invert, I can then find that erroneous area. And there it is. It's some faces underneath the model. So X, delete, get rid of them. May as well. In fact, I may as well do a fresh unwrap at this point. So now I'm just going to shift things around a little more, trying to get as much as I can out of this. If I can get all of these shapes into a smaller area, closing all of the gaps, and then just expand it, scale it up a little, I'll end up with more information within this image itself. So let's have a look now. This may take some time. So once you're done, just zoom in, making sure that nothing's overlapping or touching. There's a bit of a gap in between. That's probably a little too close for my liking. And over there as well. Let's have a look there. That's good. Bring that down a little. Yeah, just use grab and rotate. That's G and R to shift things around. Don't scale. Just leave the scale as it is. Yeah, I'll do. So now if I select all, A, you can see if I bring this to the middle here, and then I'm going to scale on the X first. Find it much easier to do the X and the Y separately. And then scale on the Y. Okay, let's change this back to shader. So I've already created a diffuse and a normal image, and if you're not sure how that's done, Shift A, S for search, type in image, image texture, and then just click on new, give it a name like diffuse or normal. 2048 is good, 2048 by 2048, click on OK, and you've got yourself an image. Anyway, so I've got my image up here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring back my high res, making sure I tab out of edit mode, that is. Bring up my high res, select it, hold down the control key on my keyboard and hit low res so that both of them are selected, and make sure that you've selected diffuse because we're going to bake the photographic texture first, the diffuse texture. Now, here are the settings I use for baking. Firstly, cycles, GPU compute if you've got it. Let's have a look now what we got. Okay, render. I always put maximum samples on 8. Coming down, max bounces. I select all of those, all the way from total to transparent. Hit 2, so everything's 2. I switch off reflective and refractive, and then moving all the way down here. Under bake, I choose diffuse from the drop-down list here. Switch off direct and indirect contributions, select selected to active, and extrusion to 0.1. Now that's all in place, a quick save, Control S, and bake. Now while that's baking, I'm going to bring down another window here and go for the image editor so I can see the result of my baked image texture. There we are. Hey, that looks good. You can actually see the swans there. Image. Save, first thing to do, of course. I'm going to create a little folder here because I'm super organized with certain things. Textures, and there we go, diffuse PNG, that will do. Save. Now I'm going to repeat the same process, but this time with normal. Just make sure that your high res and your low res are selected. High res first, control, low res, if for whatever reason you've deselected. And over here, bake type, I'm going to move to normal. And all the same settings, just click on bake. And there's our normal. We can see quite a few green and pink and blue bits here, which are standing out a little. They're little errors. Image, save, and normal PNG, that's great. Save as. Now we're going to try these out. I think I might just get rid of that little window there. Right, so we've got our two images up here. This is our diffuse and this is our normal. We've already baked our diffuse. I think I'll turn off high res. That's now hidden. You can actually delete it if you want. In fact, just to prove that you can do that, I am going to delete high res. We're done with it now. We don't need it. So diffuse. Maybe if I click over to the material view over here and color, plug that into base color. Looks impressive already, doesn't it? Strange things happening up here, but we kind of expected. They were holes to begin with. Now, we've lost a lot of detail, as you can see. So the detail has been saved in the normal map. Now I'm going to add, oops, I'm not going to add that. I'm going to add a normal map over here. I'll grab normal, put it into normal. Just push that down to there. And color into color. You've got loads of detail there. Now, you may not have seen that. So what I'll do, just for now, just for your sake, if I just disconnect color and I'll bring this down to something quite sharp, maybe like a black, for instance. There we go. Can you see the detail that's come through now in that normal map? Maybe if I just hover over there and I just remove this, you'll see the difference it makes. Normal maps are really incredible. So there we go. All of that detail preserved on a low resolution mesh via normal. I'll plug that back in here. So now we have a very optimized mesh, but it has problems. Those holes. Now that we've baked everything in, I'm going to go to sculpting and repair any rubbishy meshes that I created earlier. I like to use the smooth tool, being very careful not to take out too much natural shape in our model. I'm going to tap away at all of the areas that I've repaired. They're quite obvious. You can see that there's little anomalies going on in the mesh. Like that. If I wanted to build that area up so that it's more of an edge, if I go over to the draw tool, making sure plus is selected up here, I can just paint that in as well. And then perhaps go over it again with the smooth. Same here, that looks like a bit of a depression there, which I don't think should be there. So with the draw tool, let's paint that in, maybe add a bit of detail there. I think this entire area had gone. There we go, built that up quite nicely. And with the smooth tool, just clean it up a little bit. That looks good. Another one here, perhaps just a few little taps of the draw tool just to bring that out, and then smooth it. That looks a bit funny, doesn't it? I'll give that a tap as well. Oh yeah, you can see there's a clear dent there. So let's take that dent out and then smooth it back a little. Just wiggle your model around a little so you get a good idea of what is actually going on. Again, just tap away and smooth. Do you know, I think that's looking pretty good. Yeah, I think we may be done here. I feel that's a bit sharp there. Yeah, that looks good. Save, go back to layout. All we need to do now is repair the holes in the actual texture itself. For this, I'm going to go over to texture paint. I normally get rid of this bit here, just so we're in one pane, and I'm going to be using the stamp tool. Now get yourself nice in position here. The stamp tool works by taking from an area where there is good texture and then painting that texture onto an area where it's not so good. So let me just show you how that looks first. It's not very obvious there. Maybe if I go for a bad area just to exaggerate it. There we go. You can see that it's copied from there over to where I was painting. Let me show you how to do this. Hold down the control key. Look for a good area, an area that you want the same texture here, for instance, onto here. Click, and you can see that it's placed the cursor here. Now if I start painting, I can copy that information. You can just about make it out, can't you? Where you can see near the cursor there, you've got a few strokes, and that has come over to here also. Don't go mad with it. Do this bit by bit. Keep on moving around and doing small areas at a time for the best effect. You might want to zoom in. Now, incidentally, if you can't see the texture that I'm currently working on, it's because if you come over here to the active tool workspace settings, you can actually go between the normal map that we created and the diffuse. So just make sure that you've checked diffuse. All right, once you've done, just double check to make sure you've covered everything. Go over to Save All Images. Just click on Save All Images to save your current diffuse. So that file, which we saved in textures, is now up to date. Oh, have I missed a bit? I have. Let's just quickly cover that. Like that, and save images. I think we're done. Don't know if there's anything else that needs doing. Now I'm going to flip over to normals. Same thing. Again, getting rid of any erroneous colors like this. And you can actually look at the texture this time. Rather than it being the photographic side of things, it's going to be the textural side of things. And try and mimic the textures. If you see a seam, let's see if I can find an example of a seam. There's one there. Don't mess with it. Leave that as it is, because that's just the way normal maps work. Same again, save all images. I think though, I'll just have a double check on the diffuse, because I'm sure there are some areas on the floor here which might need a bit of work. Let's have a look. No, it's not too bad. I think that will do. That looks really good. That is fine. That's how you repair a model. I'm sure you're wondering how I always get a smooth edge around the outer parts of my photo scans. Let me just show you that very quickly. If I go to top-down view, number 7 on the keyboard, tab into edit. I think for this I'll dip over to the solid view here. Using the vertex select, I will select any vertex that's hanging out like this. Can you see you've got 1, 2, 3 in the same square? There's one there, another one there. Oh, actually there's more going on there. I need to come back to that. Once I've selected a number of them, I will Control X and it will just put that on instead. But I think if I just select those two, merge at center, and then I'll just continue to select any of those edges like thus. Good, we're done. And just make sure you dissolve all of those, Control X, so you don't have any of those little in-between points. You'll find that during the method that we're going to use, which is going to sculpting and smoothing, those little additional points kind of still remain jagged and they make a bit of a mess. But now that I've removed them, if I go over to sculpting, and again, top-down view is good, zoom in, use the smooth tool and just smooth it out like that. Don't go too far in, you don't want to start smoothing out good detail. Now there are various things I like to do to finish my model up. One thing is to flatten the terrain that it sits on. I think at this point I'm going to just rotate it a little. You see it's rotating around this pivot point. Maybe what I'll do for now is tab into edit, select all, A, and just grab and drop it in the middle of that pivot point there. I can't quite see it there. There it is. Something like that, just for now. Yeah, go into side view, 3. I'm going to rotate it, just get it absolutely spot on, like that. Tab into edit, slightly move it over that way, like that. I will come back to that and do that more precisely in a little while. But now that's in place, tab into edit, go to the edge select, just select one edge just to make sure nothing else is selected, Shift Alt and just click somewhere on the outside, and it should, if you've got rid of all those little points that I was removing earlier, it should select the entire outer edge of my model. Now I'm going to choose this over here, proportional editing. If I click on that, and let's say if I grab Z and pull down, you can see it's pulling more than just the line down. So if I just drag that down a little and then reduce this radius using the mouse wheel to something like that, and maybe pull that up a little more, soften it a little more. There we go, that looks good. And we could even go SZ, scale on the Z, 0, just to flatten it out like that. Maybe drag it down slightly again, reducing the radius as I do so. That is totally flat. That is perfect. Now, while that's selected, I'm going to S, cursor to selected. So that's now in the center of the selection itself. And now coming out of edit mode, object, set origin, origin to cursor. So now the origin point for this model is dead on in the center of this selected ring. There we are. We have a decent, clean model. Once it was full of holes and bad geometry, but now it's optimized and everything's looking good. All of the holes are filled and the texture looks amazing. Now, if you'd like to own this model yourself, you can download it from my CG Trader page. Take a look in the description. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.